Okay, yesterday we talked about determining the theme and how we can determine a theme from a piece of text that we're reading. And we went through our story Fox. And remember the process of identifying a theme. First, we identify some of the life issues that are contained in the work. And then for each of those life issues, we ask the question, is the author sending us a message about that life issue? And then from there, we're able to craft possible thesis statements about the theme of the work. Okay? When we were ending our mini lesson yesterday, I told you that when you're writing a literary essay about theme, you focus on different things. You focus on elements of writing. One of the things that you can concentrate on or focus on is author's craft. Now, if you remember back to our first unit that we had at the beginning of the year, Reading the Weather, Reading the World, we talked about nonfiction author's craft. That nonfiction author's craft, like quoting an expert, comparing it to something that we know. Now we're going to talk about fiction author's craft, or literary devices. Now, you already know a little bit about this because you have done some work writing stories, narratives, in previous years. You also are readers of fiction, but you don't necessarily stop to become aware of the literary device or to even know what it is called. So this is a list of some literary devices that you might encounter when you're reading. Obviously, these lists tend to they're not very static. They're fluid, where we can add other literary devices as we think of them or as we learn of them. But I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about these types of literary elements. The first one is comparing. Now, there are two ways that an author can compare something. An author can use a simile. An author can use a metaphor. Now, similes are easier to identify because the author compares something using the words like or as. Okay, and I'm going to cover this up for just a second so I can show you what we're talking about. If we go back to our text, where we have Fox coming in. If you can't see the board, you have your text in front of you. He flickers through the trees like a tongue of fire. That's a simile. Using the words like or as when comparing two different things. So we have like and as. Now, metaphors do not use like or as. If Margaret Wilde decided to compare Fox using a metaphor, she might say something like, Fox was a tongue of fire, flickering through the forest. Okay? Notice we're still comparing Fox to a tongue of fire, but we're not using the words like or as. Sometimes using a metaphor, if you write a simile first and then remove the like and as, it's an easy way to create a metaphor. And why would an author want to do that? Well, an author would want to do that because It can make you think in certain ways. In this case, what does comparing fox to a tongue of fire do for the reader in this story? Galila, what does it do? Well, it certainly does. It kind of signals something a little bit scary, okay? Maybe a little bit dangerous. Fire can be dangerous, yes? And in our story, why is that important? Okay, so and I think that I agree with both of those statements. Number one, it's giving us a signal that Fox is probably a dangerous, scary character, but it's also reminding us of an event that happened at the very beginning of the story, which was the fire that caused the injury to Magpie. Okay? All right, let's look at the second literary. Now, sound effects. We don't really have many sound effects in our text of Fox, but oftentimes an author may use sound effects. Okay? Does anybody remember the term that we use for a word that is a sound, like boom, crash? What do we call that? Onomatopoeia. Okay? And oftentimes onomatopoeia is used to almost kind of get you to hear the story. Remember, part of that visualizing, being in it, living in the event, living in the shoes of the character. So sound effects can sometimes help the reader to envision. All right, then we have like dialect or words from another language. Okay, so that we can, again, hear the person talking. If you were writing, for example, a story about somebody who lived in the South, you might have them say y'all, okay? If you were writing a story that was set in a Hispanic community, you might shake your pepper shaker over your story with some Spanish terms and Spanish references, okay? So we have situations where the author might decide to include dialect or words from another language. And I think that's important for you to realize. The author decides which literary devices that they want to use because the author wants to tell you something without coming right out and telling you. All right, let's look at the next one, alliteration. Who remembers what alliteration is? Eliza? Okay, and I think that the easiest thing for us to relate that to something we know are like tongue twisters. Sally sells seashells by the seashore. And that is what alliteration is. It repeats that same letter sound at the beginning of words. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a whole. Doesn't have to necessarily have to be a whole sentence. Sometimes it might just be 3 or 4 words. Okay, but that's what alliteration is. Then we have repetition. Now, repetition could be words repeating. All right, what kinds of words repeat in our story, Fox? What kinds of words repeat? Emma? Right? Let me find where I will be, let me do this again, right here. I will be your missing eye and you will be my wings. And Magpie repeats that several times, right? Is there anything else that's repeated? A and C? Okay, so we have that reference to just dying and melting. We have that at the beginning of the story. We have that at the end of the story. Definitely, Bryn, something else?
She said, I'll never leave God. I is missing I, and he's my missing me.
Okay, we already did that one. You might have missed it. Elizabeth, a different one?
Like 3 times Fox said, I am faster than dog.
Okay, and so we get down to this part right here. I can run faster than dog, faster than the wind, leave dog and come with me. And then he whispers different words. Do you remember what it is like to fly, truly fly? But she repeats, I will never leave dog. Okay? So it does get repeated, but the idea gets repeated, not necessarily the exact words. So the fact that he's whispering to her does get repeated, but he doesn't necessarily use the same words each time. Okay, so do we get the idea of what we're talking about when we have repetition? It can be an image. It can be exact words that repeat themselves. It can be a mirror image of an event that occurred earlier that occurs again. Definitely that melting that Aiden referred to. I would even include another one in the middle with the flickering flame of Fox, okay? Okay, let's look at our list again. All right, and then descriptive words or sentences. I want you to go to the part where it talks about with Magpie clinging to his back, he races through the scrub, past the stringy barks, the clumps of yellow box trees, and into blueness. He runs so swiftly, it is almost as if they were flying. So we have this through the scrub, past the stringy barks, past the clumps of yellow box trees, and into blueness, that descriptive. And notice this blueness. Okay, blue is a cool color. We have those hot colors, and now we have this cool colors that are coming through. Those descriptive words and using words that are unusual. Remember when we found the section that said that the smell of Fox in the cave was the smell of rage, envy, and loneliness? 3 things that are not smells at all. They're emotions. So 3 things that are not smells at all. We have another descriptive here. After the rains, when saplings are springing up, using that word specifically, making that choice specifically of that word, because it hints at spring. So we have him running through we have him running through summer. And then we know fall after that, through winter, and spring after the spring rains. So now we're back to summer again. Okay? But remember, again, we're talking about using literary devices on purpose. An author makes decisions, just like you make decisions when you're writing an essay. An author makes decisions about what they want, how they want to tell the story. The words that they want to use, the images they want to paint. Okay, let's get down to the last one, symbols or images. Let's talk for a second. We know that Margaret Wilde made deliberate decisions about her characters. Think for a minute about why she may have chosen Fox. Why is Fox a fox? Why did she make that choice? Roman?
Because a black finds a bird and it is a predator to the black.
Say it again.
I think it's because a bird or a predator is a fox.
Okay, so Roman's point is he thinks it's because foxes are predators to birds. Natalie, what do you think? Say it again. Okay, I think that's a valid point. A fox, in a lot of stories, especially fables, foxes are not good characters, are they? They're evil. They're sly. They're sneaky, right? And making Fox that character, all right, fits what Margaret Wilde wants to do. To tell you, the reader, that this is a sly and sneaky and perhaps evil character. So the point today is to, number one, realize that authors make deliberate choices in how they tell their stories. They pick literary devices on purpose in which to tell the story, and that as an essayist, which is what we all are, writing about a literary work, creating, composing, Lorenzo, a literary essay, one of the things that we need to do is to analyze the author's craft. One of the things we need to do is to read our text with a lens for identifying the author's craft and recognizing what the use of that craft does to us as a reader. All right, if you could go ahead and slip your green packet out of your binder, I want to point out a chart to you. This chart is available to you in your binder, and except for taking the FSA, whenever you're taking a test, you can access this chart. Now, be careful though. This is the fictional author's craft. You also have one that is a nonfiction author's craft. So be very careful when you decide, because remember this one right here, nonfiction author's craft and techniques, which we used in our unit of study, Reading the Weather, Reading the World. This is the chart that we have for when we're reading fiction. So again, we have our alliteration. We also have allusion, which we didn't talk about, okay? Now, assonance is, or assonance, different people pronounce it different ways. Alliteration is the repetition of consonants. Assonance is the repetition of vowels, okay? Hyperbole is exaggeration, an exaggerated comment. Imagery, we already talked about metaphor and simile. Personification is when you give human-like qualities to something that's not human. Like the sun blinked its eyes, or you can say that the trees reached for the sky. Then we talked about the symbolism. We said that fox is a symbol of evil, of danger. Now, tone and mood. We've talked about this a little bit in passing. The most important thing to remember is that tone is the attitude that the author takes. If you think about people talking in a certain tone, okay? It might be a very stern tone, an angry tone, okay? So tone is the way the author is speaking. Mood is the way you feel. How is the author making you feel? That's mood. That's mood. Okay, so just remember that you can always refer back to this chart whenever you have a question about fiction, author's craft, or whenever you're trying to identify it. Okay. And we're going to stop right there for now. go ahead and make sure that you're filing your things away where they belong.